This week in Texas history, we're going to start a new unit on the Texas Revolution. This is a very exciting period in the history of Texas. As part of that unit, we're going to read this book, Remember the Alamo by Cynthia McCarty. This is a very unique book because it is a storybook, but it's based on fact. It has a table of contents, a bit like a non-fiction book, and it has lots of pictures and diagrams and maps. They're called text features, which are going to help us understand the story of the Texas Revolution. Plus, it has a glossary at the end. The words that you see within the book that are bolded have the definitions in the glossary at the back, which is a very unique feature for a storybook. You often see that in a textbook, but not a storybook. So this is sort of a combination of a textbook. It's a story and it's based on it's a story, but it's based on fact. Chapter 1, Free Land. My name is Addie McLeod. I used to live on a farm in Tennessee with my ma and pa. When I was 10 years old, my mom died from a fever. Pa was very sad. He wanted a new life, and I did too. So we sold our farm and our house. We sold most of our belongings. What we had left, we put in a covered wagon. Then we started out for Texas. I didn't know anything about Texas, so I asked Pa about it. Well, Texas is part of Mexico, he told me. It has mountains and deserts, but it doesn't have many people. Then how come we're going there, I asked. You can see that this was all Mexico at that time, and this was the United States. Texas is a good place, especially for people who want to start over, Pa answered, like us. Pa said that a man named Stephen Austin had moved from Arkansas to Texas. He thought it was a great place to live, and the Mexican government wanted more people to settle there. Mr. Austin knew this, so he came up with a plan. He told the Mexican leaders that Americans would move to Texas if they could get free land. These people would build houses and schools. They would make Texas a safe place to live. The leaders thought Mr. Austin had a good idea, so they promised 4,000 acres of free land to any American who came to Texas. Are we going to get some free land? I asked Pa. He gave me a big smile. You bet we are. Here's Stephen F. Austin, and this is a picture of what Texas looked like back then. Chapter 2, A Broken Promise. Pa talked about a time before the white people came. Texas had belonged to the Caddo Indians. They called themselves Tejas. Tejas was the Caddo word for friends. Then Spanish explorers came to Mexico. They turned the word Tejas into Texas. Spain once owned Mexico, Pa said, but in 1821, Mexico fought a war against Spain. The people wanted to be free of Spanish rule. Look at the picture of the people fighting Mexico against Spain. Pa and I traveled many weeks in our covered wagon. Finally, we got to Texas. Right away, I saw how different it was from Tennessee. The air was warm and dry. The land was brown. The prairie grass was as tall as Pa. Pa and I got our free land. It was a few miles outside the town of San Antonio. San Antonio was the capital of Texas. It was named for the river flowing through the town. San Antonio was an exciting, noisy place. Many of the buildings were made of white stone. They glittered in the sunshine. Flowers spilled out of window boxes. People drove little two-wheeled donkey carts through the streets, and chickens and goats ran everywhere. Sounds pretty different than today. And here's a picture of what the houses must have looked like back then. I think if you go to San Antonio, you'll see the brick is still there. The white stone buildings are there still. The women and girls wore ruffled skirts. They wore colorful shawls over their blouses. The men wore multicolored serapes over their white shirts. Now, can you see that this is bolded? That means that's a word in the glossary at the back. The glossary is like a dictionary, especially for the book that you're reading. Serape, woolen blanket. Loud, happy music could be heard from cantinas. And there's another one that we should be able to find in the glossary. Cantina is a restaurant or a saloon. There were several mission churches in the city. Oh, there's mission, and that's capitalized too. So mission is local church or parish that depends on religious organization for support. And we learned about missions in our last unit. So there were several mission churches in the city. Each one had a tall bell tower. One of the churches was called the Alamo. Pa and I didn't spend much time in San Antonio. We were busy on our farm. We worked from sun up to sundown. There's their farm. Pa built a cabin out of adobe. Do you remember what adobe was from our Native American unit? Brick made out of sun-dried earth and straw. So they built a cabin out of adobe. We decided to raise cotton. Some of the other farmers raised longhorn cattle. Every summer we had to pick the cotton. That was hard work. But we didn't always work. Sometimes we had company over, and then Pa would get out his fiddle and play a tune. A fiddle is a violin. My favorite was Turkey in the Straw. Pretty soon, everyone would be dancing. We called those parties fandangos. And again, that is bolded. So I'm going to go back here, and it says dance or party. That's a Spanish word. By 1833, some 30,000 Americans lived in Texas. Pa and I had been there for 3 years. Pa said there was enough room in Texas for a man to really spread out, and I felt the same way. I loved the wide open spaces. I loved the sound of the whippoorwills, and I'm guessing that's that bird there. I especially loved the wildflowers that bloomed in the spring. I loved to pick them. My favorite flowers were the big yellow roses. The Americans tried to be good citizens of Mexico. That's what we'd promised the Mexican government, and the Mexican leaders had promised us we could live in freedom. For a while, they kept their promise, and then a man named Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna took over Mexico. From that time on, everything changed.